second of all, share screen. All right. Oh, it's at the middle here. So let's work on making an offer they can't refuse. So we're going to kind of go the anatomy of getting your offers accepted, right? So first is I just want to do like literally, I'm going to time myself a 5-minute recap of kind of how we got to this point, where and why we're in a multiple offer situation in Richmond, Virginia. Of course, it's happening nationally, but there's definitely some specifics that I want you to be able to pinpoint. The reason why I want you to know this is that when you're explaining it to a buyer or even a seller, there's obviously some reasoning behind it. It still doesn't alleviate the frustration, but there's sometimes the why is explaining that is important for those that kind of work their way through. So there's 6 snapshot trends that I want you guys to be aware of. Screenshot of these, I'll email you this PDF as well, but this would be great stuff for you to put in your presentations, whether it's buyer or seller presentation. So first, as we know, for the whole year, closed sales is up 7%, but look how it's just grown at 3-year trends. I also threw in certain areas that are the hottest, which is good to see. Petersburg, Goochland, New Kent are up. So what you can also see, whether it's COVID or inventory, people are spreading out. I know a lot of you guys work in the Chesterfield. Yes, that's competitive, but it's not as competitive as some of the other areas. So believe it or not, you think, oh, let's go out to some more rural areas. They're just as crazy with their home sales. So don't think just you're going to chase it away by going to like Amelia or Goochland, okay? The second thing I want you to know is just the volume is increasing. But look how it's just grown each year, 3-year trends. It's up 18%. So just kind of know that as a whole. And then written pendings, this is where you guys are going to get in the multiple offer situations. Over 20,000 pendings last year. So there's tons of them. And these are the ones that accepted. You guys know that a lot of times we're writing 4, 5, 6 offers with the same buyer. I think I have a coaching client that had 14 written in one buyer. But this is just stuff that stuck on the wall that actually kind of made headway. And then the final number here is average sales price. I want you guys to know this. This is what I want you to scream out loud. Is look at the price, the average price of a single family home in Richmond 2 years ago or 3 years ago to now. It's crazy. So I want you to kind of be aware of that. Where's my little clicker? $38,000. So if your same house you bought in 2018 for $232, you're now paying $269 for the same exact house. So really make sure you guys are coaching and consulting your people, buyer and sellers that. And then again, you can see a snapshot of these prices increases. Richmond City is pretty dominant in our area. Powhatan's dominant as well. So just kind of know some of these data. So that's kind of where we've come from as far as how we're kind of in the, I wouldn't say mess, but how we are in this dog-eat-dog, like slaying dragons situation. And then we're down almost 40% of our month supply. So look at just how crazy it's gotten very quickly in the last 3 years, okay? Not anything new, but just something I wanted you to be aware of. Days on market is flying off the shelf, things like that. Key things I want you also to be aware of is that still we're way below the national average. So if locals, a lot of times I'm hearing them say, oh my gosh, house prices are getting too ridiculous. We're actually still very low compared to the national average. We're 6.1% below that. So it's still a very affordable place to live. A lot of people obviously know that with their kind of commuting from DC. We also got huge ranks on diversity, which is pretty awesome. And then also one of the top 13 cities where you can live under $50,000, which is good. And then millennials, number 2 is Richmond. Millennials are loving the city. So these are great things for you to intertwine in social media and into your conversations with your clients. So I wanted to just give you a quick recap. Is that 5 minutes? Yes, perfect. So we can't the coach in me can't talk about multiple offers without kind of coaching you through a couple models. And if you've coached for me for a while, you've heard these models, and we really got to sharpen these models. And so a lot of people are always like, well, I don't really follow a model. I just kind of say what I need to say. I don't want to sound like a robot. I get that. But a model is just a pattern of it's something that you can do consistently so you can get better results. So it's just a visual way for you to communicate a path with your clients. And I want you to realize that you want to keep it simple. So I'm going to teach you just a couple simple negotiation models that you can use. I personally write them down on a notebook as I'm consulting with my buyer to make sure that I kind of stay on path. Because again, it's a visual and it's simple. So make sure you realize that if you're using any type of model, if it's super complicated and you can't remember it, in my opinion, you should just move on. So use something. So let's first talk about the thinking of when we negotiate. You know me, you know that I want you to assess their personality, right? So it starts with how they think of the programming of their personalities. A lot of people, let's say sellers and buyers, bought houses 6, 7, 10 years ago, and they think they know how real estate works. Well, they've never seen a market like this. They've never seen interest rate like this, and we've never seen inventory is so low. So what they thought they were playing with as far as real estate game is not even on the same level anymore. So make sure that you're talking to them about what's currently going on, even if you think they're an experienced buyer. So if you've ever looked at any assessment of DISC, it's their personality. It's how they react. So the D is the dominance. The I is the social part, the emotion part of all of us. The S is the systematic part of us, and the C is the compliance part of us. We all know, if you've coached with me, that we mostly have 2 dominants and 2 that are a little bit less leading, right? So one thing you got to realize is that you got to start to figure out who that person is pretty quickly, kind of size them up in a metaphorical way as far as, are they super dominant? Do they feel like they have to win? Because if they're a dominant buyer and they think they're going to win in this market and they're going to like steal the house, that could be really challenging to overcome. High I, they could be super emotional if they lose this offer, right? They're going to be devastated if they're one of 20 offers and they don't get the deal, right? The SCs are more steady and more compliant based, right? So you're going to have to explain some of what we're going to go through in a second really in detail before you even hit the Authenticign button. You got to really do a good job of explaining what that whole process is going to look like, because you know in multiple offers there's a lot what I call ping-ponging back and forth. There's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of strategy that we're going to talk about, and a lot of SCs need to see that whole thing played out. I've given you a couple tools that I'll share with you, some like checklists. SCs, if you're, I coach a lot of you that are SCs, love a checklist. So it's not uncommon for you to show those kind of things to your buyers to kind of get them acclimated for the runway, so to speak. Mirror and match. If you've never heard that before, you need to kind of blend into what their personality is to a certain extent. If they're highly emotional, I don't want you to be super highly emotional. But a lot of times when you're negotiating with someone, whether it's the seller or the buyer or the other agent on the other side of the deal, you kind of have to dance their dance. So if they're a fast talker, you need to speed up. That's what you need to do for a short period of time. Also listen to their tone. What I mean specifically is when you're working with the listing agent. Obviously, my goal for you is to always call the listing agent and get them on the phone. I'm finding that's somewhat of a challenge in this market because listing agents are not picking up the phone, but you want to start to physically hear the tonality of their voice to see where they're coming from, if they're aggressive or vice versa. Identify their traits, like again, the DISC, and then know who you are, like know what your hot buttons are, because you kind of have to date a little bit here. Part of all the data shows that your relationship with the listing agent is the key determiner if they're going to really play ball with you to get you to win. So if the listing agent's honestly a complete jerk, you have to just kind of work your way through it, but be respectful and professional, because unfortunately it's not legal, but they can present your offer but advise their client not to take your offer just based on your personality or your tone. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. I am a dominant personality, and so when somebody says or does something on the phone that I'm not excited about, it definitely pisses me off, frankly. But we got to be careful. Our goal is to be able to get that win, which is to get a ratified deal. So hold some of that back. Be careful about that, okay? All right, so let's go into the first model, and then kind of we'll end this, and we'll go into specific strategies for multiple offer. But you can see, if you read it backwards, GROW. And if I've coached you before, you probably have heard me coach you to use this model. You're actually looking at two models inside the same one. And so I would like for you guys to write down or listen to kind of the recording later, but GROW stands for goal. The R stands for reality. The O stands for obstacle. And the W stands for will forward. So if you're talking to a buyer or a seller, or you're negotiating between the listing agent, conversations would be like, well, what is your goal of the seller? What are some things that I know when I write the offer that the seller's expecting, right? That's the goal. What's the end result? The R is the reality. The reality is you're going to ask questions about, are there multiple offers, right? How many offers do you have? One thing that you may know is that actually the code of ethics says that you can ask the listing agent if they have got permission from the seller to share what the other offers are. You're allowed to do that. So if they've got two other offers, you can say, awesome, the current reality is you have two offers. Would you mind sharing with me the terms and conditions of those two offers? Now, there's a percentage chance that they're going to say, no, I can't share that information because the seller hasn't asked me to. Or they could, and they could say, well, I can't tell you that. Well, you could say, well, actually, the code of ethics says you can, as long as you get permission. And the reason why I want you to kind of focus on that reality is your goal is to beat those other offers, and you ethically can ask that question and get that data. And a lot of times agents don't know they can ask that question. And then the obstacle, obviously, is what obstacles that your buyer kind of like has. So we'll talk about that. What's going to make your offer not super strong, right? You need to know what those obstacles are. Maybe it's they don't have a lot of cash in the bank. Maybe it's they have a certain loan type that you know that's probably not going to be super great as far as strength-wise. And then you're going to need to will them forward. You're going to need to come up with some discussion with the listing agent on, if I can get the offer to write X, Y, and Z, will your seller accept ours? Again, that's what we call an embedded command. That's something that your goal is for them to say yes. So obviously, they're most likely not going to say yes, but you want to start planting the seed that you're in that relationship and you're already going to win the deal. That usually psychologically makes a big difference on if they really do start to lean. If you look at this model from left to right, so you're going to go positive present, go down to negative present, and then go right and then back up. So think about in like a kind of a weird bingo board there. It's the same exact thing. Positive present would be like the same concept. What's the seller need? Negative present, what's currently going on that's affecting you not possibly to accept our offer? What if we don't get the offer? Obviously, we have to go back in the car and go look at other stuff. And positive future is you've hit all of the ingredients and the offer, and you won the deal, right? So I want you to think about this model in a way that's super simple, where you can just remember there's kind of like an agenda as you're having a discussion, whether it's with your buyer or it's with your listing agent if you're negotiating with them, okay? So just a little model that I wanted to throw in there that makes sense. The last part of kind of, again, coaching the models here is, hold on, Kenny, let me mute you. I think he got muted himself. Is that you need to use keyword backtracking. What that means is that if your buyer's using an emotion word, you need to repeat that back in a question. So an example would say, oh my gosh, if I don't get this house, I'm gonna be so upset. And then you're gonna use the word upset in there in that question, right? They're gonna say, all right, Mr. Buyer, I know you're gonna be upset if we don't get this offer, but we aren't putting all of our eggs in the basket. We're not literally offering us, we have some holes in our offer. So if you're really going to be upset about not getting this house, we need to increase your earnest money deposit, or we need to get a higher down payment so we can show you have some skin in the game. Or you're going to give strategies to help them, but the word keyword backtracking allows them to use their words. I wouldn't say it's used against them. It's used to remind them that that's the emotion that they're feeling. And that's, again, a psychological way to kind of nudge them mentally to make better decisions. Switch cost is just giving them two strategies. Nobody likes to be backed into a corner, especially grown adults, right? So think about that. You're giving them two options, but one is better than the other, right? So Mr. Buyer, it looks like we have two choices here. We can go in with full price, ask for $5,000 in closing costs, or we could go in with full price and ask for no closing costs, which again would net the seller more money, and most likely they're going to look at that offer more favorably. Which one do you think would win us the contract, right? That's a switch cost. You're giving them choice A and choice B. Of course, the one that you want them to lean towards is going to be more incentivized of a pain that they're not going to get that offer accepted. Again, these are subtle things that you're going to say. I don't believe in scripts. I believe that you should have a dialogue with your buyer or a listing agent when you're doing multiple offers, but you need to really be aware of how you're setting this stage for this transaction to work. It's not all about the pieces and parts on the piece of paper, the contract. It's about the dialogue and the language and the relationship you have with your client and the listing agent. And again, if that doesn't work, sometimes that's what implodes the deal, not the nuts and bolts of the contract. Okay, so just kind of think through that. All right, so let's 20 minutes in. I do want to go through the kind of the nuts and bolts of multiple offers. And so the way I always look at it in any contract, even if it's not in a multiple offer situation, that the contract is like ingredients. So if you're kind of looking at making a cake, what are the ingredients that makes it all kind of work together? What it makes it taste good and rise and all those great things. Now I feel like I want to eat cake, right? So you really want to make sure you know what those ingredients are, especially in a multiple offer. So these are the ingredients that we need to really be conscious of, and I'm going to break them apart, and we want to have some discussion on it. So your buyer may think that the price is the only thing that's going to get them the win for their offer. That is not necessarily true, and there's a ton of experienced agents on this training call. You know, it's sometimes the most random thing that caused that ingredient for that to be a win for you. Or it was one of those things that you didn't even see on your radar, and it's what caused the deal to completely just never connect and never get ratified, right? So I want to talk and walk through each ingredient here to make sure we know what these strategies are. And in fact, I put all of these into a checklist. So we're going to go through these, and I can email this to you. It would be very smart if I was a buyer's agent to sit down with my buyer with this checklist and talk strategy. Again, you got to realize that you're playing this game, but your buyer doesn't know how to play the game, especially if they're a first-time home buyer, especially if they haven't bought in the last 3 years, because the game has changed, right? So we need to know what the ingredients and how they affect things. So the first thing is price, right? We always talk about that as a high negotiation. Lowball offers are not a thing you can do right now, right? But we also want you to do your comps, but be very careful of your comps. Realize that comps generally rely on 30 to 60-day-old data. In fact, the pending data, which you don't get the actual result of that number until it closes, right? So make sure you realize and you coach your buyer to understand this, that market value is the price the purchaser is willing to pay for the product or service, right? So if it's listed at 300 and your CMA says it's worth 295, but you don't know what those pendings are and you're coaching your buyer that says, I think they've overpriced it. Well, the problem is that you don't know the resistance of what the market value has created. Low inventory, obviously it's creating a competitive environment with multiple buyers, right? So who's willing to, quote, pay more, almost an auction mentality. So one of the things that I would recommend is that if you see pendings in that CMA that you're using, call the buyer agent and ask if you can know what the ratified price is. Again, they don't have to tell you, but I will tell you through experience, they almost always tell you the price. So if you see it pended at 300, call the buyer's agent and say, hey, I'm about to write an offer on a house in the neighborhood. I see you pended it. It was listed at 300. Would you be willing to tell me what your buyer paid above the asking price? And again, oftentimes they're going to say, yeah, we paid 330, because they want to brag and they want to kind of get excited that they won the deal. That's a much more accurate CMA than using sold data and then just kind of fudging or moving your way through with pending data. Does that make sense? But just kind of be aware of that and make sure you're having conversations. It is okay to ask those buyer agents questions. If they don't want to share, that's a different story, but I want you just to be aware that that's a strategy I want you to think through, okay? Seller net price. Make sure your buyer understands, and I know that you guys know this because but the buyer doesn't always understand what a seller net price is, right? So obviously, it's the offer price minus any closing costs, right? So if you're writing an offer 300, 5,000 in closing costs, the seller's netting 295. It's funny, I actually coach people like, well, we put in a full price offer, and then I kind of peel the onion back, and you didn't. According to the seller, you didn't, right? According to the buyer, yes, they're paying full price on their loan amount, but they're building in that. So make sure you're explaining when you're negotiating the multiple offers with a buyer that we may look weaker. We may look like we don't have an advantage because you're not technically according to a seller net price, right? Again, conversations you need to have with your client as you're consulting on how to get those perfect ingredients together. Loan risk. Realize that all loans are not created equal. And if I ask you which loan's probably the strongest, it's going to be conventional, right? So talk to your lender, talk to your buyer and say, okay, you proved for VA, you proved for BH or USDA or FHA. If we get in a multiple offer situation, can we change that loan type, right? Is there a way that we can show the seller that we have some confidence, and realize that there's different overlays for lenders. So what I mean by overlays, if you haven't heard that, is that you could call lender A and they pre-approve your person FHA and they're like, that's all they can do. Then you can call lender B and they're like, no, they can do conventional. And you're like, well, why can one bank only approve FHA and the other can approve conventional? They have different requirements based on their loan, their company that they work for. So don't just take it for face value. If you get a pre-qualification letter or pre-approval letter of FHA, dig in there and say, is there something, other options that we could explore in the event we have to change it up to make our offer strong, okay? Down payment, seller looking at is skin in the game. So make sure you're filling that in the contract. Don't leave that blank when there's a section in there that talks about the percentage down, right? If you're doing a USDA VA loan, often there's no money down or very little money down, right? Conventional people, especially sellers, like to see that 20% down. Again, they're trying to see, get the buyer in the shoes of the seller. Like, hey, I got 10 offers. I'm trying to find one that's most likely going to get the finish line with the least amount of risk, right? So we're not trying to insult the credibility or the credit score or anything about your buyer, but you really want to educate them that people are looking at their pre-approval much more scrupulously than we probably have in the last 2 years, okay? So just make sure you're really kind of staying on top of that piece. All right, some final ingredients that I want to coach through, and then we'll kind of open it up for some strategy discussion. Inspections, big deal right now, right? Home inspections, as is or no inspection at all, I will tell you that makes my stomach hurt, right? I do feel like as a buyer beware state in Virginia, it's a challenge to coach or consult your client to not do one. But it needs to be open for discussion. It needs to be a discussion on what the buyer's comfort level is and what parameters you can put in there, because literally we've seen crazy offers, 30, 40,000 over asking, and then they don't do a home inspection at all. And realize as is, if you use the addendum that is inside our MLS system, it actually has a 10-day home inspection. So it's not saying that you can't do a home inspection. It's saying that you're just not going to ask for any repairs. And it actually does have a release of contract terminology in that as is addendum. So there's a lot of misconstrued information about as is. So make sure you're reading that addendum and your buyer consumer understands that, because they need to understand the repercussions. A lot of things what we're seeing now is putting limitations on repairs, right? What we're seeing is that sellers don't want to be nitpicked. They're in the driver's seat right now as it's a seller's market. So the first $2,000 of the purchasers will waive those repair limits, right? Or I've also seen any items $500 or less, the purchaser will not ask for repairs. Both of these are strategic multiple offer things to where you're trying to basically put your hands up and say, my buyer's not trying to nitpick the house, my buyer's not trying to walk away from it, but there is something that, you know, there is like a ceiling of liability for the buyer. Oh, Kitty, my dogs are talking to your dog. And one thing I didn't put in here when I needed to, so make sure you make a note of this, is that optional paragraph. So I think it's been over a year now that they added that optional paragraph to our Cedar MLS purchase agreement. I have not found that to be a productive paragraph in a multiple offer. So do not, in my opinion, to coach you through that, is do not use that optional paragraph. Again, it's showing that you want an out for your buyer quickly. And I think sellers start to see that as a flight risk and they get challenged. I don't know if they're going to continue using that paragraph. I think the intention was to kind of simplify home inspections, because in other parts of Virginia, they do have similar clauses. I think multiple offers have almost obliterated that optional paragraph. I didn't put that on here because honestly, it's, in my opinion, it's just not something that I would highly recommend as going forward. So then let's talk about appraisals. That's a key ingredient right now. People are doing appraisals not subject to an appraisal. The challenge, you have to do it on a loan, right? The loan has to be a secured value, so you can't make it subject to an appraisal, waiving the appraisal only unless it's cash. But there's also, you can put a clause in there where you can actually have the purchaser pay the difference of the appraisal, right? And you also could add a limitation. You could put a ceiling on it. Again, purchaser to pay the first $3,000 of the appraised value in the event the purchase price is not met. So make sure you realize that appraisal is a huge thing that's affecting. We are seeing appraisals coming in short, but not as many as I honestly was expecting, right? So prices are definitely increasing. Demand is increasing, so appraisals are kind of walking through that at real time. So have a discussion with the lender and have a discussion with the buyer. Make sure they're very knowledgeable on what that, if you are removing that contingency. I will tell you that a lot of people are using that now. And I would be the first one to say that I would have never coached or consulted a buyer to waive an appraisal, but we're seeing them waiving 20, 30,000 over, right? The discussion in that means to say purchaser to pay the $3,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 over the appraised value. That's physical cash that the buyer has to put down, right, to cover the difference. So it needs to have a discussion, whether the lender needs to have it or you feel confident enough to talk about it, is do they have that money somewhere, right? Yeah, it's one thing to say, yeah, I can pay the difference, and then it's 20 grand. They're like, oh, I don't have that, right? Because it's the difference of the cash down. So make sure that you're having this discussion. Again, all of these ingredients are something you need to talk about. Don't talk about just one ingredient and not the other, because it kind of all has to play in this symbiotic relationship on how you're going to really win and win the offer. The final things, small details do matter. EMD, we always coach you to say, hey, 1% is kind of the typical thing. So a $300,000 house, you put in $3,000 in earnest money deposit. Well, that's up for grabs now. People are definitely wanting to see more skin in the game, meaning the seller wants to see that, right? So if I see 10 offers and I see everybody put $3,000 down and you put $5,000 down, I'm looking at your offer as a possible option because I see some more skin in the game, right? Devil's advocate is make sure it doesn't get too high. And so a lot of people are like, well, how much is too high? So I've seen EMD of like $20,000, stuff like that. Well, if stuff goes south, that $20,000 is held, and you have to negotiate / hire an attorney to get that released, right? So that does affect things if you're kind of, releasing this contract, moving on to the next one. So EMD, increase it, but be careful, don't get super crazy on the amount, because if it gets locked in through somehow of litigation or negotiation, your buyer can obviously use that cash until then, because it's cashed right when the ratified contract exists, right? Personal property, I've seen a ton of this right now where we're throwing stuff in. I feel like we're an auction company where we're throwing in washers and dryers and refrigerators and trying to get some value out of that in negotiation, right? So that's fine. Make sure you're using a bill of sale, and also make sure that you realize that it's not dollar for dollar, right? So think about a washer and dryer. Let's say they're $1,000 if you bought them at Home Depot. That doesn't mean you're giving $1,000 value evaluation in that. And sometimes sellers think that, and buyers do as well. So again, I don't want you to get into personal property business, but we've seen that that has sometimes sealed the deal, allowed us to get winning offers accepted. HOA rescission period. Everybody knows, right? You get that opportunity for your client, if it's in an HOA, POA area, to review those documents. And then if they don't like those documents, they can leave the contract. Well, you can write in the contract that you're waiving that. Your buyer is not going to walk away because of the HOA. I had one, actually my wife last year did one, and another agent won the deal. And so my wife called the agent and said, would you mind after it closes kind of chat with me on how you got that deal ratified and how I got booted out, right? And the agent clearly said, I put in an HOA situation that they weren't going to use that HOA rescission period as an scapegoat, right? So again, talking through all these, you want to look at this whole situation as you're trying to close as many doors. It's a challenge because your buyer is looking at that as, wow, sellers looking at it differently, right? So they're looking at it as a way to secure the best offer. Closing date and rent backs. We see a lot of agents, specifically sellers, are freaking out, like they get multiple offers, but then they have no place to go, right? So when you're talking to the listing agent, when you're looking at that closing date, let's talk about that flexibility. That ingredient really could be important to the seller, right? If they're like, oh my gosh, okay, my house is going to go under contract in 24 hours. Well, now I'm going to be, quote, homeless. What could we do? What could we do? A seller rent back where we close, but the seller stays in for a couple more weeks? Could we extend that closing date another two days or 3 days to give them a little bit more flexibility of time, right? Make sure you realize that that is, the form, I think, is an occupancy agreement. If there's a seller and then a buyer occupancy agreement, it does have a proration of a rent back. So typically or historically, we take that mortgage payment, the new mortgage payment, and divide out the daily rate, and that's kind of how you figure out rent. But just make sure, again, if you need to consult an attorney, there's obviously liability. Someone's moving into the house or staying in the house that they either technically don't own anymore or that they're, departing from. Acceptance dates and deadlines. One of the things on MLS, it says, I'm not going to review, the seller's not going to review offers until Monday at 5 o'clock. Right? That is actually not a legal requirement. That's an advertisement. That's what they want, right? So if you're a buyer and you're writing an offer, you can really negotiate or strategize in a nice professional way to see if you can get ahead of that. Now, the seller is going to push back and say, no, I want to see all 20 offers on the table so I can really see what's the best for me, right? But again, there's that ping pong concept of that acceptance date and those offer deadlines. Realize that those aren't set in stone and those are a moving object, right? And so, and we're even seeing, right? We're seeing offers go in on properties that are sight unseen. Another, again, offer deadlines, or we even see it's coming soon and people are writing offers on coming soon. So yes, the MLS has those fields. Yes, they have requirements to disclose those kind of advertisements to you as the buyer co-op agent, but you don't have to always play that game. You can dance the dance slightly different, and just, again, it's based on that relationship and that personality and that tonality, because if you can kind of work your way through it, you may get a little bit of an advantage of getting an offer in and submitted prior to that tug of war multiple offer thing. Not always 100% silver bullet, but something I want you to kind of really keep on your radar. This is a multiple offer worksheet. If you represent a seller, flipping it on the other side, why are you not using this, right? So if you're sending them offer after offer with through Authentisign, or you're PDFing all these offers, first of all, they're not most likely going to look at all those ingredients, right? They're just going to look at the one they think is the most important. But your job as the consultant on the selling side is to weigh those offers. So in this example, there's 20 offers, right? So if you need this spreadsheet, I can send it to you. But it's really important that you work through those offers and you fill all those ingredients in, and then you share this with them. So I personally would recommend you starting with this, whether it's Zoom or in person at their kitchen table, if you represent the seller, and just really highlight, mark, circle what the ones that you think strategically are a better fit. Again, it's based on all of these ingredients, and if they have escalation clauses, which we're going to talk about, you've got to calculate that number. And I'll tell you, I've done some that are like 3, 4, 5 in, and they knock each other out. It's the math, and not to be joking, but realtors aren't historically great at math except for commission. So we gotta, be prepared so you feel really confident to explain what that multiple offer situation is, right? And this is, again, if you're seeing 12, 14 offers, if you're on the buy side, you're gonna need to tell your buyer, hey, they're gonna sit down and weigh all these ingredients. And they're gonna see what's our weak ingredient, what's the one that's maybe not gonna make it the best situation, and they're going to look at the other one and see the same thing. They're going to weigh all of those poker hands and decide on who they're going to bet on, right? So again, coaching both sides of the table on how that multiple offer. So hopefully you've seen this. There's an escalation clause. Cut and paste and use it exactly as it's worded, because obviously legal counsel has reviewed it. But one of the strategies right now is mixing it up. Don't just put flat numbers in there. So that first we've seen historically is $500 or $1,000 escalation, right? We want to kind of mix it up. Do a random number in there, 750, 825, like do something different. Because if you have multiple offers and multiple have an escalation, you actually may win just by $150. And I've seen it time and time again where they mixed up. So don't just get comfortable with that standardization of escalation clause, insert flat number, right? Play the game, move the chips around, because at the end of the day, you want to put a cap in there, right? So not to exceed, so it protects your client. But at the end of the day, that 750 or whatever that escalation clause is the difference sometimes between getting it one or not. The other thing to note is that the seller doesn't have to use an escalation clause. Some people just don't like them, and they can cross it out.
Alan, hey, it's Ann Mitchell with Keller Williams again.
Oh, hey, Ann.
My clients are signing their offer. I'm getting it to you as.
And so basically, they can cross out the escalation clause and just tell you it's highest and best, right? So they're basically saying go all in and may the best man or woman win, right? So an escalation clause is not by law has to be used, even though you may, as a buyer agent, put it in. But make sure you, in my opinion, it doesn't hurt to put it in all the way through, okay? Kind of some final things, and then I want to open up to you guys. So we got about 15 minutes to mastermind, is that you got to prep your buyer for this multiple offer reality, right? What it really means, because what I see and what I kind of hear through coaching conversations is that we're already knee deep in it. We've already wrote the offer. They're already rejected it. And now the buyer's upset. We need to have this multiple offer strategy session early, right? Show them what all the ingredients are. Show them all the options they have. They can decide what they want to choose and not do. They can decide on what concessions they want to make or not make, right? It's their risk, right? But one of the things that is interesting, and we think this is an assumption of just everybody does it, but they literally did a survey at the end of last year that only 52% of buyers, active buyers, actually obtained a pre-approval letter before they began looking at houses. In my opinion, if you're showing buyers that aren't pre-approved and they're in this crazy market with multiple offers, they're not even a real buyer. So if I'm coaching you in your pipeline and you have it as an A, as a high quality lead, and they're not pre-approved, I'm going to push back at you and say, are they? Because they got to have that effort and that skin in the game to show, again, that confidence that the seller's looking for. And just know that the listing agent does rule. They hold most, if not all, the cards. And in order for you to get the keys to the kingdom, you have to dance with the listing agent and have that respect, right? And I will tell you, and the listing agents, some of them are not pleasant to work with, but it's just part of the game and it's part of the strategy of negotiation. I will tell you, after the transaction's over, you can professionally and politely discuss some of their tone and the words they use, but kind of keep it in your pocket while you're going through the transaction, right? Again, it does make or break some deals, whether you believe it or not. Prep the buyer with a buyer letter to the seller. So we have one. I can give you a template of it here. But basically, the seller needs to have some emotional connection a lot of times. I personally do not recommend putting a photo in there. I've actually seen in a couple situations that people just have biases, right? Whether it's the last name or it's the color of their skin or it's the way they dress or something that happens, the seller has their own biases. They're not protected against the obviously fair housing. You are. So you have to abide by fair housing rules. So I do get a little bit of a challenge if you're going to present a letter that's causing some great, thought for the seller, and you put your photo in there. Also, make sure you PDF that letter within the contract itself when you're sending it maybe through Authentisign. We want it to not be detached. The assumption is that the listing agent by law is presenting all documents to the seller, but we don't know that, right? So let's better not leave it up to chance, and I want you to lock it together as a PDF, less likely for that to be detached. I think it's important. I've, again, seen people use those letters and they make a significant difference. And then discuss the use of an escalation. Show them the sample of an escalation so they're not freaking out when you send it an Authentisign at 11 o'clock at night. Discuss all those removal of those key ingredients, home inspections, appraisals, a checklist. There's nothing wrong with showing them that checklist. Like, hey, these are all the ingredients in the contract. Which ones are you willing to play with? And which ones are you wanting to hold strong and just keep with the standard contract, right? Discuss their funds and their money. If you have to be that consultant right now, because we need to know. We need to know how far we can push it financially for them. Of course, this is confidential information, so you're not going to be sharing it with the listing agent or anybody else. But having that discussion, whether it's with the lender on the phone or not, may be a strategy that you want to work through there. All right, last couple things is also discussing with the lender the loan type, right? And then also having the local lender on standby for the listing agent to verify the strength of the buyer. When you're submitting an offer, say they are approved by ABC lender and his or her name is this, and this is her phone number, and they are expecting your call, or they will be calling you, right? You want that backup, you want that extra confidence that that lender is ready to play ball. That buyer is locked and loaded and ready to execute the contract and get to the finish line of the transaction, right? So play these teammates up, get everybody on the team set up so when you're submitting offers. Make sure you're testing the buyer's motivation. Again, asking that when we're talking about that model, the GROW model, right? That obstacle is, how would you feel if you didn't get this offer accepted on this home? Like, how are you going to feel about that, right? And if they're like, you win some, you lose some, well, we may not be having the same motivation, right? Or is it, oh my God, I'll be devastated. I have to be out of my place in a month. I don't know how I'm ever going to find another house. I'm going to be homeless. Like, they're really kind of in that emotional state. Again, that's going to need to go back to will them forward. Well, then we're probably going to need to reevaluate the structure of our offer, because to be honest, I'm not sure this is going to be strong enough to win the deal, right? So again, test that motivation. If you do lose the offer, I highly recommend I have a buyer letter, right? So, and I have a sample of that as well. But sending that out is important. So if you find somebody like that street or a couple streets over, they saw that listing. They live in that neighborhood. They saw how fast it went under contract, right? So sending a letter that says, hey, my buyer's ready to go, and we didn't get this offer on 123 Smith Street. We'd love to work with you, hassle-free, and we're ready to do it as a private transaction, right? You don't have to have the hassle of doing that. Again, that's unrepresented seller historically, or AKA for sale by owner. If they're not comfortable with that, you can probably work within your agency to do a designated agency path where they do have some representation. But again, your goal is just to prep your buyer with what are these challenges and what are some strategies as you go forward, all right? So let's hear from you guys, kind of stories from you guys. What did you hear? I'll unshare this. What did you hear? What are some other kind of things you guys got accomplished? Maybe some ingredients that I forgot or didn't include that won you some multiple offers. So I'm going to stop and share. What are some things that you guys are hearing out there that's giving you a competitive advantage to actually get them to accept your offer? So I'm going to shut up. All you beautiful people. Are we winning offers, or we're just beating up our head against a brick wall still? What's some ingredients that you think are working to your favor, or what's some that you're still stumbling with? I know y'all have some of them. This is where the brilliant minds of you guys.
For me, inspections have been huge. Sellers don't seem to want to have to deal with either fixing things or giving a credit. So on my last 2 offers that were accepted, one was we gave a $750 because it was a newer place. We knew it wouldn't have much. We would forgive the first $750, so we're getting a credit of $300. And then the second was it was a flip, so we said any items under $500 we would forgive.
Yeah.
And that's, they like.
And so when on the buy side, when you suggested that strategy, were they like, yeah, let's go for it, or are they resistant, like, no, you crazy?
You just have to be really, like, I felt like you have to be so communicative, like really, really talk them through this and do like the what if, like, okay, I was really nervous, actually, honestly, doing the one that forgave everything under $500, because I was like, you could have 20 things that are $400, and $400 times 20, that's a lot of money, and some of them could be legitimate things that you really need to get in there and fix right away. So you need to be really clear and prepared. Unfortunately, she is dating a guy who's a contractor, so I said, don't break up with him until you've gotten into the house.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why you have to get that. You feel like you're going in the weeds a little bit, or you're diving too deep, but they got to start to really think creatively. Everybody who's winning offers is like, I feel like we're trying to throw spaghetti on the wall and just getting it to stick. So you're not, that feeling of I don't know, that anxiety is not uncommon right now, but it's like you have all those buyers that are ready to buy. If you're not using all those ingredients correctly, they're not buying houses and you're not making commission. So who's winning here? So anything else, any strategies that you guys are using? I know there's some buyer agents on here, some rockstar agents and teams. Do you guys have a checklist? Do you guys use like, hey, this is the key things that the ingredients is what I call them that we can kind of negotiate with? I think that checklist is important so you can mentally go like, did I miss something? Because I always would lay it in at night and we lost a deal. I'm like, crap. What if I would have done this instead of that? Or what if I added this? Would it have made the difference of getting the deal, right? You feel bad for your buyer not to get the deal. So I do think it's important to kind of know what all of those options are as you walk through. Anything else that you guys?
I think what's really important is making, just like what Catherine said, that you're very clear with your buyers what they're doing. Because a lot of them will say, just throw anything at it. I want the house.
Yeah.
You have to go through line by line and explain, okay, if I say this financially,
what happens?
This, da, 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 da. And so I think that's the other thing is so many times we're using our heads to get right up that offer, but we haven't made sure that they understand, because a lot of times they're unprotected. Like,
I mean, pretty much everything we just talked about is unprotecting your buyer. Like, it's basically saying, here's a blank piece of paper, seller, and you can write whatever you want on it, right? And I
Right.
know that is not what you want to do to protect your buyer, but you also want them to get a house. So I agree, verbally and in writing. Everything you say on the phone, put it in a text message and ask for confirmation. Don't just say, these are what we talked about, blah, blah. Do you understand? Is that confirmation? Can you give me a thumbs up? Like, give me a, you know, again, legally to make sure, because they're not going to come back at you and say, you told me not to do the appraisal. Now I have $25,000 I have to come up with in 5 minutes, right?
Right.
Well, we talked about, do you have enough cash to cover this if it does appraise crazy? Like, we didn't put a cap on it, so it could be 30,000. Like, what are we doing here, right? So it definitely is more, it almost causes us to more communicate with our buyers than we ever have. And then they're already stressed out. So I agree, Catherine and Amy, 100%. And you got to have it in a way that you can almost have checks and balances. Again, similar to like a checklist. Have them sign the bottom of the damn checklist. I don't care. Just have something where they're like, you comprehend what I'm saying, and these are the side effects of what we have, right? I mean, I always joke, it's like, we all complain about hangovers, but we know what alcohol does to us that causes that, right? So we're making a choice to drink that alcohol. Well, they're making a choice to write an offer this way, make sure they understand what the hangover is, make sure they understand what the effects of the choices they're making. And that's all you're supposed to do. You're not supposed to tell them what to do. You're supposed to give them their choices.
Right. I think the other thing that doesn't come up enough, and I'm not sure, like, there's not a document for it, but a lot of times whenever we waive that HOA thing, there are sometimes things that the HOA is required that the buyer may get stuck with. It doesn't say that the seller has to do it. It just says that it has to. So
Right.
that's the other thing, is like, make sure you're not with some really tight, strict HOA.
Grander Mill.
Yeah. That's
Wood
gonna,
Lake.
that have 2 of them. I mean, yeah. So that's the other thing, is make sure you know everything before you're advising, well, we could waive this and we could waive this. Well,
Yeah.
what if you didn't know that was this crazy HOA?
Yeah.
That's
And all of that has to happen quick, because you show a house at 2 o'clock and it's going to go under contract by 3. So what we're talking about and all that crazy we just took 45 minutes to discuss has to happen in like 30 minutes. Like, that's how crazy fast this stuff is. So you got to be really good with your buyer consults and really good with explaining what that is. I would honestly turn my buyer consultation into this is a multiple offer Q&A 101. Like, this is what we're going to do. It's a 95% chance this is what you're going to face. If we don't get multiple offers, good for us. Because every price point's affected. Higher end, middle priced, first time home buyer, investment. I haven't seen any price point that's not affected by multiple offers. And again, if you looked at the original data I was showing you, it's also location. You can't act like, oh, in Powhatan it's not going to be a multiple offer, and oh, in Goochland it's not. That's not true anymore. It's all starting to spread out because people are going to what they think as a safer, more at least competitive environment, and that's actually not happening right now. And I don't think it's going to happen for 2021. Right?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
have,
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to share a story real quick that happened to me today. So go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I had just a couple of things super quick. One, I actually had a listing agent who did not want a letter because of fair housing laws.
Yeah.
Yep.
She said
heard that too.
specifically, yeah, and I was so thankful that I asked. I
Yep.
said, can't, second, our offer won not because the lender was waiting for the listing agent to call. It was because she was able to tell the owners, this is the only lender who reached out to me
Yeah.
before I had a
Big
chance
deal.
to reach it. That
Because
was
it's
huge.
showing that seller that we're on our A game. We're ready to play ball, right? That's teeing
Exactly.
that conversation up with the lender and the buyer and the listing agent. That's your responsibility to get that ball rolling. And
Right.
the fair housing one, I actually had a seller, and it's just probably years ago, but she was flat racist. I'll just tell you, it was crazy. And I was like, okay, well, anything that I know is going to cause her to be biased. I said, if you do it, don't do a seller letter, because I want to make sure she gives fair and honest representation to all the offers.
Right.
So
Right.
it was, I use fair housing as an excuse, but sometimes we know our clients are just not
Right.
following a
Right.
straight line the way they should. And our job is for the listing agent is to get the deal to be ratified in a moral, ethical, fiduciary way, right?
Right.
I agree.
And then I will say the third one is, as is sounds great, but I was on the selling side and we countered because as is really the optional paragraph.
It is. That as is addendum is very misleading, in my opinion. If you read the as is addendum, first of all, it says 10 days. So if you put 14 days on your home inspection paragraph, and then it automatically says 10 on the as is, which one's right? 14 or the 10. So they need to match. And then the second thing it does, it says, I'm going to do the home inspection. I'm not going to ask for repairs, but I can also walk. So
Exactly.
if you really compare that as is addendum to that option paragraph, aren't they the same thing?
Yeah,
So,
I think so. I didn't. I
and
was
if you're
going
a
to ask
seller, that's
Amy.
what that's the filter you're reading it from.
Right. And so that's the filter that we read it from. And we went back and we said, hey, we want a 5-day inspection and we don't want the as is.
Yeah. So we're seeing terminology where instead of using that as addendum, they literally say home is as is, seller to make no repairs. Home inspection is for informational purpose. It's a little bit more watered down. It doesn't have that more specific starch thick paragraph as the as is addendum, because that as is addendum is filled, riddled with get out, get out, get out, walk away. And a seller's not jiving with that. Although I had one yesterday, Kenny's not on here anymore, I don't think, but his seller insisted on the as is addendum versus the buyer who actually wrote a better contract without it. I'm like, by adding this as is addendum, it's making it worse. Like it's not protecting you as a seller, but they're adamant. I'm like, the word as is doesn't always mean what I think we get that from auctions or distressed properties or foreclosure.
Right.
It's not always the same way. So sorry,
Right.
getting crazy. So, well, I wanted you to just make sure you break down those ingredients, make sure you know that those components make a big deal. I think everybody thinks it's price, and I will tell you 9 times out of 10, it's not about the price. It's just not. And that one, probably the most recent one is those seller rent backs. Sellers are freaking out because they have nowhere to go. So ask that question, like, hey, I'm submitting an offer. Does your seller have a place to go? And they're like, well, they're going to have to start looking. All right. Well, if my buyer could kind of do a rent back where they could stay in the house for a couple of weeks and help them, not feel stressed about finding that new house real quick, would that help sweeten the deal to get us in a position where we're kind of in first position for an offer? Use all those weird little creative ingredients and coach your buyers. I think there's never a bulletproof transaction, but that's at least insulating it with some more options. Okay. All right. Well, I know you guys are busy writing offers, and I'll hop off here. If you need anything else, reach out to me directly, and I'll see you guys later. All right.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Are you gonna send those forms?
I'm sending you the forms, the PowerPoint, and the recording, all in one email. Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.